turn to the book of Amos again, if you would, in the Old Testament. It's one of our little minor prophets. And it's you have my permission to use the table of contents in the front of your Bible to find what page Amos is on, because it's a little book. It's hard to find. Again, a minor prophet. Not that the message is minor, but it's just a short book. And we call this section the Minor Prophets. Now, James has pretty well finished up the book of Amos last week. And here I am sort of caught in the middle. I hate to start something really, really new. I think our next book is the book of Micah, which is 2 books down from Amos. And I'll let James start Micah next week. But just this morning, as we sort of tread water between the 2 books, I'll take a few minutes to think about the message of the prophets and a little bit of some examples of what they did and how they did. I'll be the first to admit that whenever we read a lot of the Old Testament, especially in these prophets, it's very, very difficult to make them relevant to us, for us to understand the message, for us to understand the setting. We've got to put ourselves in their time period, in their language, in their culture, and yes, in their geography. Because, as we know, we've read through these books, and this town is mentioned, a name that we can't pronounce, can't understand, and this town is mentioned, and that town's mentioned, and it's just Greek to us, right? And so it's very difficult for us to just open up a minor prophet and go to reading and get that. The message is there. The message is constant. The message is God says through the prophets, you have broken your covenant relationship with me as holy God. You've left me. You have, in a very awful use of words, you have prostituted yourself by going after other gods. And you've left me. You've broken our marriage. And because of that, if you don't return, I'm going to bring destruction. Military destruction from another country is going to come over here and destroy your cities, destroy your towns, and take you off to captivity. And that's the message, in and out, up and down, day and night, that these prophets are trying to say to these people that have hardened their hearts and closed their ears to the message. The prophets were very specific in how they said their message. They knew what to say, but how they said it was the struggle, just like us. We can stand here and teach. Our minister can stand and preach. That's only half of the equation. The other half is, do we learn? Do we really hear? And just saying the words and quoting the scriptures and all that, that's good, that's proper. But our mission is for us as the audience to learn, to hear. And those of you that maybe were teachers, we could say, I taught those kids, they just didn't get it. They just didn't learn. Does that ever happen? Well, yeah, sometimes, we were all knot-headed kids at times, I'm sure. But a good teacher has to realize, yes, my teaching is good if the kiddos learn. And that's the way it is with our prophets. Saying the words is not enough. It's got to be received into the hearts of the people so that God's will can be worked that the message of the prophets can find its home. Now the methods that the prophets use are here and there, different places, different times, but the message is the same. Let's always remember that. The methods change, but the message stays the same. We've got a screen up front. We've got things that we used to never have. Our methods of proclaiming the gospel have changed. Has the message changed? No, not at all. All right. Just for a few examples, I'll take some time to just look at a few little things that the prophets used to help make their point. Number one, the prophets sometimes said, let's learn a lesson from history. God has done this in the past, and we all know about it. So let's make sure God doesn't have to do it on us again. One of the examples that the prophets use about God's coming destruction is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The wicked cities that were ungodly, and God destroyed them, and we all know the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the prophets hold that up in their message repeatedly to say, don't you remember the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? God's going to repeat that if you don't turn away from your sin. And yes, there were just a handful that God plucked out of the death of Sodom and Gomorrah. Be one of those. Turn to God. Be one of those that survived Sodom and Gomorrah by leaving the sin. You do that. Well, in our day and time, there's catastrophes of history that we all know about and think about that are so horrible that we don't want to remember them. We all know relatively recently about the Holocaust in Europe during World War II. Unspeakable, terrible things happen to people. And we don't want to ever redo that. We don't ever want to repeat that, do we? No. And so that would be our message. We don't want to go through the Holocaust again. Do right. Do right. And that's the way the prophets did about this idea of Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember that. God will take care of you one way or the other, for good or bad. But if you turn away from Him, you'll be like Sodom and Gomorrah. Amos chapter 4, verse 4. No, I'm sorry. Amos chapter 4, verse 11. Not that you need to necessarily turn there, but Amos says, Sodom and Gomorrah, to these people. Remember the lessons of history. Remember the lessons of history. All right, that's the first one. Number two, sometimes the prophets use sarcasm. Sarcasm to make their point. And we know what being sarcastic means. It's being sort of edgy, a little bit rude in the way you say something. But sarcasm sort of magnifies the idea, right? It's just like looking at through a magnifying glass to something. We usually use sarcasm to make a point, to try to correct someone. Let me think of an example. Maybe I'm always late. Maybe I'm always late to church. And I walk in late and somebody says, Well, I see you're on time this morning. And it's sort of, edgy, but that's sarcasm. And the point is taken that I need to be on time. All right. In Amos chapter 4, verses 4 and 5, Amos says to these people, okay, just go ahead and go to your cities here. There's a town called Bethel and a town called Gilgal, and go ahead and just go and sin, and you just take your sacrifices and you bring your tithes there, and you take your bread offering there, and you brag about it, and you're proud of it, and all you do there, sitting as you worship other gods. And then he says, for this is what you love to do. This is what you like to do. And that's a sarcastic way of saying, just go on about your business, the evil, because that's just what you just love to do. And that sarcasm sort of magnifies it. Okay. This is something that the prophets do to get their point across. All right, number 3. And we know this one real well. Sometimes they use illustrations. Illustrations from common everyday life. All right? Who was the master of this? Jesus Christ on earth. You remember the stories he told, the parables he told. From everyday life, examples of a bird falling down from the sky without the Lord knowing about it. The hairs of our head being numbered. The parables of the sower, the parable of this and that. Jesus was a master of illustration. So, to make these examples come home to people, the prophets did the same thing. In one of the earlier chapters, chapter 2, verse 13, Amos talks about God is going to crush you just like a cart full of grain. Well, they knew what a cart full of grain was. It was heavy. God is going to bring destruction and run over you and flatten you just like a cart full of grain. In our parlance, our words, we would say, God's going to roll over us just like a steamroller. That's a figure of speech we would use, right? Okay. In verse, chapter 7, the first half of chapter 7, God uses some images to Amos that they knew very well about the coming destruction. Now, these are God's images shown to Amos, and Amos sees them and talks to God about it. And I'm sure Amos then relays this vision, this story to the people to say, this is what God's going to do to us if we don't turn around. One was a vision of locusts coming. And they knew what the hordes of locusts did. I'm sure they came every once in a while through the country. And God showed a swarm of locust vision to Amos, just devouring the land. And Amos says, oh Lord, we just can't stand that. We just can't stand up under that. Please give us some time. And God says, well, okay. And then God shows Amos a vision of fire. It's so hot and so devouring that it eats up the land and the water and the sea and everything. And Amos says, oh Lord, we can't survive. We just can't survive that kind of destruction. Please give us some time. And God says, okay. And then the third image, and we remember this from James's lesson, is the image of the plumb line. All right, today when we have carpenters and builders and masons do a building, we have levels. It's a tool that can tell you how level things are, either horizontally or right straight up vertically. We've got to have that. We've got to have a building that's plumb, level, square. But prior to our tools, all they had was basically a rock on a string. And if you stand real still, that's going to always go right straight down towards the center of the earth. And that was their measure that was their guide to make sure the walls were straight and true. So God shows Amos this plumb line and says, "What is it, Amos?" And Amos says, "It's a plumb line." And God says, "Okay, I'm going to hold this up against Israel. I'm going to be a measuring stick. This is going to be a measuring stick to how true and plumb and square Israel is." And of course, the answer we know of that is it's not square, it's not true, it's not level, it's not plumb. Then the Lord said, "Look, I am setting a plumb line against the people Israel, and I will spare them no longer." And then he says, "The high places of Isaac will be destroyed. The sanctuaries of Israel will be ruined, and I will bring the sword upon you." Now, that was the image, something that they all knew, that the prophets used in telling the story. In our parlance, our world, we would talk about a level or something like that. Measuring tape. He used a plumb line to say, God is going to judge you to see if you're plumb and straight and true. And you're not. So he's going to bring destruction. Now, just as an aside here, this has nothing to do with our lesson, except a story, I guess. It doesn't mean much. I'm amazed at the construction methods that we have today to build a 50-story skyscraper or whatever, and it be straight and true, and the elevator shafts can go all the way to the top and back down. Even the World Trade Towers that came down in 9/11, tall buildings. They were straight and true. There is a skyscraper in Panama City, Panama, I understand. The elevator will only go up so far, and then you have to get off, and the people have to walk upstairs the rest of the way up to the top of this tall building. Why? Because when they built it, the elevator shafts and all that weren't all true and square, and so the elevator can only go up so far. Then they got to get out. That's, I guess, a lesson in life. But can you imagine building a building without the tools that we have today? And that's the image of the plumb line. Illustrations that our prophets used. All right, in first part of Amos chapter 8, he has the image of a basket of ripe fruit. Amos, what do you see? Well, it's ripe fruit. That means the fruit's ready. It's time to pick it. Otherwise, it's going to get overripe, and we know what happens then. It's going to rot and fall away and be terrible. So he says, Israel, you're ripe. You're ready. If you don't turn to the Lord, then you're going to decay. It's going to be awful, the destruction that I'm going to bring on you. All right, so we see that. But while we're here in chapter 8, I want to point out something that we see. Whenever the prophets tell the message of God, some of it's, big sins, going after an idol and going after other gods and such and so. But there's some things that we would call small sins that are mentioned over and over again that God's very serious about. that's one of them is cheating the poor. Cheating and taking advantage of people who are down and out. And that's a situation that we see that I guess has been around since the beginning of time and will exist through the time that we have here, as long as this world is. The classes that are in control, and authority, and wealth take advantage of those who are not. And we can see through our past history how the deck was stacked, as we would say, against those who don't have much. It's cheating, to put it bluntly. And God doesn't like that at all. And he talks about such things over and over. And today we call it social justice. That's a big word that a lot of people want to throw around. It's just doing what's right. Even when nobody's looking, we do what's right. God condemned these people for cheating people, taking advantage, deceiving, and taking advantage of these people. And we say, yeah, but that's just 2 bits here, 2 bits there. No, God sees all. And if you'll cheat in something little, you'll cheat in something big. It says something about our heart. Let me see here. In chapter 8, verse 5 or so, he talks about selling grain. All right, we have a grain crop. I'm the landowner, so I'm going to sell my wheat to the poor so they can make their bread and survive another day. And when you sell your poor, Amos says, you cheat on the measure. If you sell it by the bushel that you have is just a little bit short, a little bit small, a little bit shy. So you can, sell more grain for more price. That's cheating. And he says, you have dishonest scales. Oh my. Would anybody ever do that today? Dishonest scales? You see, their scales in the old day were, just the balance scale. You put, say, a pound over here and this side, and you stack up your wheat over here till it balanced out. All right. You had to trust the owner of the scales that this pound weight over here was accurate. And of course, it wasn't a lot of times. They cheated. Yes, ma'am.
I can remember growing up pulling cotton, and some of them would pull the green bowls because they weighed more than the other.
Yes, okay.
And put them in their bag, to weigh, because the green bowls weighed more.
Reason I laughed, I remember my dad saying he would have workers come in to help pick, and some of them put rocks in the sack to weigh more. So I guess that stuff happens, yes. And that'll last till you have to go weigh your sack, and then the person that dumps it out realizes that there's green bowls in it or rocks, and then you're caught, right? Yes. The tendency to cheat in weights and measures is so prevalent that our state of Texas has a department of weights and measures that goes out to all the businesses that are in trade to make sure that their volumes are correct that they sell and their scales are correct. When you go to pump gas at a gas station, you look on this pump there, and there's a yellow sticker that says the inspection date from the state of Texas, that it was certified that this pump that says it pumps 5 gallons of gas pumps truly 5 gallons of gas. And there's inspectors that go around all the time, and that's their job, is to make sure gas pumps are accurate. And you go to H-E-B or grocery store, and sometimes there's a scale hanging, and so you can see how much your bananas weigh. And sometimes there's a label on the scale that says not certified for trade, which means it's not inspected. So just it's a good scale, good guess, but it's not legal for trade. And then you may see another scale for weighing things, like the meat counter or whatever. It's got that little yellow sticker on it, again, that says certified by the state of Texas on a certain date that it's accurate. So what I'm saying is this: the tendency to cheat in business is so ingrained that it was in the simple culture of Amos's day, 700 BC, down to our culture right now today in 2023. Do we need to do away with this weights and measures inspection stuff because we're all good people now? No. It'd be back terrible again, because that's just the nature of greedy people who don't want to do right. And I see this over and over, and this is not just Amos, but all these prophetic books talk about injustices like that. And I think, how timeless is the message of the prophets? Turn to God. Turn to God.
There was a story a couple of years ago about, the chains that they use in football to see if you've made a first down or not,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Certain number of yards, right?
Yes.
Well, somehow or another they were using this set of chains, and they knew exactly that it was 10 yards from where the marker and where the ball was. They knew from looking at the field. But the first down marker went beyond that, so the chains were too long. They had been over or under whatever.
Yeah.
They had been not giving them credit for moving the ball adequately because the chains were too long. So
Okay.
even in something like that, I don't know who it benefited, but
Yeah.
anyway, they weren't accurate.
Yeah.
And you expected them to be accurate.
Expected them to be accurate, yes. Yes.
Everything that you're saying, Neil, reminds me of the love of money is the root of all
Yes.
evil.
Yes. The love of money is the root of all evil. It's terrible. All right, let me give you another example. Also with them selling wheat, it also mentions that into verse 6 that they were also sort of selling the chaff and the sweepings, floor sweepings, along with the wheat. Let's talk about this just a minute. We know wheat, good wheat is clean and pretty and just the little grains, right? But it has to, originally that has to be separated from the stalk and the chaff and the head and all that, and the bits and the stuff that flies out the back of the combine. Well, like that in this day they had to trash everything by hand and sift it out and blow it out and all that. And evidently they were selling a sorry grade of wheat, not just good kernels, but also a lot of the chaff and sticks and all that stuff, hulls. This is a story from my own life. In 1971, which is 52 years ago, I remember it was a dry year and didn't make much crops. And the government has a drought assistance program for the farmers. And back that many years ago, 52 years ago, a lot of farmers still had a lot of livestock on the farm, had a milk cow and had chickens and had hogs and this, that, and the other, sheep, So the government would sometimes buy grain in some of their programs, and it would still be stored at the local elevators. So the government would give out certificates for the farmers to go to the local grain elevator and get some of the government grain. You pick up a load full and take it home, feed the chickens and the cows and the hogs and everything for a while. And so we did that, not in Gatesville here, another town, so it's a different town. But we went to the little grain elevator with our certificate to get some milo, the maize, the grain that we grow here. And it was a certificate for what was called number 2 milo, which was the normal grade of milo that all the farmers had. So we went to the grain elevator and said, you know, here's our certificate for a pickup bed load of milo. All right, you go down there and go to the third bin, and my worker will meet you there and scoop it out. So we went down there and started scooping it out, and it was half trash, half chaff. And we said, this is supposed to be good milo. And the worker guy says, well, I know it's supposed to be, but the boss man told me that whenever you farmers come to get this grain, to take you down to the sorry bin, that's the floor sweepings, the reject, the chaff, the junk bin. And so we said, okay, and took the stuff home. Even in our day and time, if you can do a cheat like that, it happened. And I think back about that. The owner of the elevator was short shrifting the people that needed something so that he could keep the good stuff that the government was paying him for anyway, just to make more money. Again, it's greed. Just a little bit of money, but it's greed. So I think about that. These are timeless lessons. These are timeless lessons about human nature, right? Timeless lessons. And we got to remember that.